"You look like you're lost, old man," Judge Brett Kavanaugh sneered, eyeing the elderly black man who had just entered the federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. His black robe flowed behind him as he approached the bench, glancing over his glasses at the veteran with a smirk that oozed condescension. "Are you here for traffic court, or did you take a wrong turn at the VA hospital?" The courtroom chuckled softly, a few spectators suppressing laughter. The man at the center of the insult, Harold Jefferson, stood tall despite the years weighing down his spine. His skin was weathered like cracked leather, his back slightly hunched, his eyes deeply set with decades of battles, both on the field and in life. He wore a faded olive-drab uniform jacket adorned with patches nearly invisible from wear. His boots were polished, but old, and his left hand trembled faintly from an old injury he never spoke of. "I'm here for the hearing on Jefferson versus state procurement," Harold said calmly, his voice low but clear. "I submitted a petition on behalf of my unit, Your Honor." "You did?" Kavanaugh lifted an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "I didn't know janitors filed federal petitions these days." Another chuckle rippled through the courtroom. The court stenographer, a young woman named Maria, stiffened and glanced at Harold with a flicker of pity. Harold said nothing. He looked around the courtroom filled with marble columns, American flags, and portraits of past justices, yet somehow, in that grand space, he stood alone. "Do you even have legal representation?" Kavanaugh asked, leaning forward, "or do we need to escort you back to wherever they let you out from?" "I don't need legal representation for what I have to say," Harold replied, voice steady. "I served this country for 42 years. I buried men who died under my command. And today, I'm here because their benefits are being denied based on a procurement deal you signed off on." "Careful now." Kavanaugh's smirk faded into irritation. "You're dangerously close to contempt of court." Harold took a slow breath. "I've stared down enemies in foreign deserts. If you think your robe scares me, son, you've never known true war." The room grew quiet. Kavanaugh opened his mouth but paused as the back doors burst open. A military aide in full-dress uniform strode in, saluted toward the front. "All rise," he said with firm authority. Army General Colin Powell entering the courtroom. There was a beat of stunned silence, then gasps, whispers, chairs scraped as people scrambled to their feet. Even Judge Kavanaugh stood, stiffly, his jaw tightening. Colin Powell, regal in his dress blues, medals gleaming, stepped forward with his usual dignified stride. His presence alone commanded respect. Every journalist in the room raised their cameras, but Powell ignored them. His eyes locked on Harold. "At ease, Sergeant Major Jefferson," Powell said, his voice warm and full of reverence. "Sir." Harold nodded, emotion swelling in his throat. Powell turned to the judge. "May I address the court?" Of course, General," Kavanaugh stammered. "Please. Thank you." Powell walked with slow determination to the center of the courtroom, his face unreadable. "Judge Kavanaugh," he began, his voice steady but sharp. "Do you have any idea who you just insulted?" He was out of order. "I didn't know. You didn't care to know." Powell cut in. "This man led the 22nd Infantry Battalion in Fallujah. He saved the lives of over 80 soldiers during Operation Desert Thunder. He trained my men. He was decorated with the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Distinguished Service Cross. And yet you, a man who's never seen war, chose to mock his appearance instead of listening to his words." The courtroom was dead silent. Kavanaugh's face paled, and he avoided Harold's eyes. Powell wasn't done. Jefferson and his men were promised lifelong care, but after a recent contract restructure, one that your court approved, those promises were broken. Veterans who lost limbs are being told their records are incomplete. Widows are receiving rejection letters. Jefferson came not for himself, but for them. I wasn't aware." Kavanaugh tried. "Then maybe you shouldn't be on that bench," Powell said coldly. He turned to the room. "How many more decorated soldiers have to walk into courtrooms only to be dismissed by men in robes who never once had to duck under gunfire?" A murmur of agreement spread through the gallery. Harold stood quietly, his eyes glistening. "Sir," he said softly, "thank you." Powell walked to him and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "No, Sergeant Major, it's the country that should be thanking you." He turned back to Kavanaugh. "With the court's permission, I will present the documentation personally, and I suggest this hearing be conducted with the respect these men are owed." Kavanaugh, red-faced and visibly shaken, cleared his throat. "Yes, granted. Full review approved. Will proceed with utmost seriousness." Powell didn't sit. He stood beside Harold as he took out a folder filled with evidence, testimonies, photos, and letters. The court listened in full silence for the next hour. When Harold described one of his fallen brothers, Private Daniels, Powell's eyes welled with tears. When he described carrying a wounded man 4 miles through enemy fire, even the bailiff clenched his jaw. At the end, Harold closed the folder. "We never wanted applause," he said. "Just a promise kept." Kavanaugh didn't meet his eyes. "I move to reinstate the benefits immediately," he said. "Retroactive compensation will be arranged." This court was in error. A single clap echoed from the back, then another. Then the whole courtroom erupted in applause. Reporters stood. Flashes burst like fireworks. But the 2 men at the center, one judge now humbled, the other soldier now honored, barely moved. "You good, Harold?" Powell asked. "I am now, sir," Harold whispered. "I just wish the boys could see it." "They do," Powell said, looking toward the flag. "They always do." As the crowd exited, Powell and Harold walked out side by side. Maria, the stenographer, rushed up. "Sergeant Jefferson," she said, tears in her eyes, "my grandfather served in Korea. I just wanted to say thank you." Harold nodded. "He's the reason I kept fighting. Men like him, men like you, all of you who remember that night." The news blew up. Judge Kavanaugh publicly rebuked by Colin Powell for mocking decorated black veteran. Clips went viral. Thousands of veterans shared the moment. A fundraiser for Jefferson's old battalion hit $1 million in 48 hours. But Harold didn't care about the headlines. He sat in his small apartment, looking at the faded photos on the wall, his old squad, the battlefield, a younger Powell shaking his hand. "You did good, boys," he whispered. "I finally said what we needed to say." And somewhere deep inside him, he settled, not because of a courtroom or an apology or a headline, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had listened. Harold awoke the next morning to the sound of a knock on his door, firm, deliberate. He lived alone in a modest apartment just outside Arlington, a place filled with memories rather than luxuries. When he opened the door, a sharply dressed young black man stood on the other side. He wore a tailored navy suit and held a small folder under his arm. "Mr. Jefferson?" the man asked respectfully. "That's me. I'm Terrence Morrison. I work for Senator Hughes. The senator asked me to personally deliver this to you and request a meeting, if you're willing." Harold took the folder slowly. "Senator Hughes? Huh. Didn't expect politicians knocking on my door." Terrence smiled faintly. "After yesterday, sir, everyone's knocking." Inside the folder was a letter, not typed, but handwritten. "Sergeant Major Harold Jefferson, your testimony was not just powerful, it was righteous. I owe you and your unit more than a vote of thanks. I want to meet with you to discuss changes we need to make now, not later. With the utmost respect, Senator Rachel Hughes." Harold blinked at the words, his lips parting slightly. "I served under men who barked orders, not wrote in cursive." Terrence chuckled. The senator's got her own style. Later that week, Harold found himself inside the Capitol, seated in a polished office overlooking the city he had once marched in during parades. Rachel Hughes walked in, tall and composed, her blazer sharp, her expression warm but focused. "Sergeant Major," she said, offering a firm handshake. "Your speech in court lit a fire under the Senate floor." "Didn't expect it to," he admitted. "Well, it did. We've been stalling on the Veterans Accountability Bill for years. Suddenly, it's on everyone's lips. You gave it a face, a voice, a soul. I gave it truth, Harold said, his voice steady. And the truth's been ignored too long. She nodded solemnly. That's about to change. In the weeks that followed, Harold was invited to speak at veteran organizations, colleges, and even at a nationally televised town hall. People listened, not because he was loud, but because he was real. But it wasn't just America that noticed. An invitation came from the Department of Defense. Colin Powell stood once more at Harold's side as the Pentagon presented him with a lifetime honor, the Legacy Medal of Valor, awarded to those whose service extended beyond the battlefield, those who changed policy, who upheld justice, who inspired generations. That ceremony, streamed live, showed Harold standing before a full crowd, hands slightly shaking, voice strong as ever. I never wanted medals, he said. I never asked for stages, but I stood up because my men couldn't. And if you hear anything from me today, let it be this. Honor isn't given. It's proven in silence, in scars, in promises kept. General Powell wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. That night, Judge Kavanaugh sat alone in his office, replaying the court footage, not just of Powell's rebuke, but Harold's voice, calm and unwavering. He hadn't just mocked a man, he had mocked history. He pulled out a notepad and wrote a letter. It wasn't public, it wasn't grand. It simply read, "To Sergeant Major Jefferson, I misjudged you. I judged your cover, not your content. That mistake will follow me, but your strength will follow this nation. I am sorry." Brett M. Kavanaugh. Harold received the letter days later. He read it silently, nodded once, then placed it in a box labeled Letters That Matter. Years later, a memorial statue was commissioned in D.C., a bronze rendering of Sergeant Major Harold Jefferson, standing proud, holding the dog tags of fallen comrades in one hand and a folded flag in the other. Children would run by and stop to read the plaque. He stood alone until a nation stood with him. And underneath, in smaller letters, dedicated to all who were mocked before they were remembered, Harold never asked for legacy, but he became one. The day the statue was unveiled, the skies above Washington, D.C. were cloudless, the sun casting golden light over the National Mall. A large crowd had gathered, veterans in dress uniform, young students holding small American flags, families who had traveled from all corners of the country just to witness it. Rows of folding chairs lined the marble steps filled with lawmakers, military leaders, journalists, and old comrades who had once served under Harold Jefferson. Front and center sat Colin Powell in his full regalia, his gaze fixed on the cloth-covered statue as if it were one of his own. Harold stood just off stage, straightening his tie in the mirror of a mobile restroom trailer. His reflection had changed little in the past year, except now, wherever he went, people recognized him. They called him the voice of the forgotten, the man who spoke for the silenced. He didn't care for titles. He was still just Harold, the same man who lived alone in a modest apartment and visited the VA hospital every Tuesday. His hands trembled slightly as he fixed his medals, but his spirit was unwavering. "You ready?" came a voice from behind. He turned to see Maria, the former court stenographer, now a journalist who had quit her job after covering his case to start a podcast titled Echoes of Valor. It had since reached millions. "I guess 1M, he said with a quiet smile. "Feels strange, being made into stone." "Not stone," she said, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "Memory." As he stepped onto the stage, a standing ovation broke out. He paused, humbled. The applause wasn't just noise, it was gratitude, and it hit him like the wind in combat, sudden, unrelenting, and pure. General Powell rose to introduce him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice echoing through the speakers, "there are many heroes in our nation. Some of them wear stars, some wear stripes, but some carry wounds invisible to the eye. Harold Jefferson is such a man, And it is not just what he endured, but what he said that will echo for generations. He reminded us what we owed and what we forgot. Harold stepped forward. He looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, white and black, soldier and civilian. I was mocked once, he began slowly, because I didn't look the part, because I looked like someone you could brush aside. That day in court, I felt 50 years of silence fall off my shoulders. And when General Powell walked through those doors, I felt seen. He paused, looking down at his own hands. People ask what I wanted from that courtroom. It wasn't fame. It wasn't pity. It was dignity. For my brothers who never came home, for the widows who got letters instead of husbands, for the children who grew up thinking their fathers weren't remembered. He motioned toward the covered statue. This isn't for me, it's for every man and woman who was ever told they didn't matter, for every voice that was ever drowned out by power, robes, or indifference. Today, they rise with me. He stepped back. The cloth was pulled away. The statue revealed a tall bronze figure, Sergeant Major Harold Jefferson in full uniform, head high, 1 foot slightly forward like he was mid-step. In one hand, the dog tags. In the other, a folded American flag. His face was solemn, eyes cast outward, not toward the city, but toward the horizon. Silence filled the air, then thunderous applause. Among the crowd, a young boy turned to his mother. "Who is he?" "Mom." She knelt beside him. "He's a man who reminded the world that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scars." After the ceremony, Harold stood alone beside the statue, running a hand along the cool bronze surface. "That doesn't look like me," he said, smiling to himself. Powell joined him, arms crossed. "It looks like the man I've always known you to be." They stood in silence. Then Powell added, "Did you see who's here?" Harold turned, and there, standing awkwardly among the crowd, holding a bouquet of white roses, was Judge Brett Kavanaugh. No cameras, no entourage. Just a man in a suit, with shame in his eyes. He walked up slowly. "Sergeant Major," he said quietly, "I came to say something in person." Harold turned to face him. "I was wrong. Blind, proud, and wrong." Kavanaugh said, "That courtroom didn't deserve you. I didn't deserve to speak from the bench that day. But you changed everything." Harold nodded once. "Words have weight, Judge. Some crush, some carry." Kavanaugh handed him the roses. "Then I hope these carry the apology I can never fully speak." Harold took them, looked down, then handed them to a nearby child. "Put those at the base of the statue, son," he said, "for the ones who never came home." That night, Harold returned home, took off his jacket, and sat quietly on his old couch. The world had changed. His story had traveled far and wide, but in the quiet of that small living room, surrounded by photos of his unit, the greatest peace was knowing their names would no longer be forgotten. A knock came at the door. He opened it. A mailman handed him a large envelope from the White House. Inside, a handwritten letter from the president read, "Dear Sergeant Major Jefferson, your courage in battle was only matched by your courage in truth. You have reminded us all that patriotism isn't just about the uniform. It's about the principles that uniform defends. You are a national treasure. Sincerely." The President of the United States. Tears welled in Harold's eyes for the first time in years. He sat down, reached for his harmonica, and played the same low, slow melody he used to play by the campfire with his men, a tune that carried through the night, full of loss, of strength, of legacy, because now, finally, they had all been heard. The following morning, the air was still thick with the scent of magnolia as Harold stepped outside his building. Reporters were already waiting, some respectfully at a distance, others eager to shove microphones in his face. But Harold, in his usual steady gait, raised a hand. "No interviews today," he said gently. "Today's a day for remembering." He had somewhere important to be. At Arlington National Cemetery, under a vast open sky, rows upon rows of white headstones stretched like a silent army. Harold moved between them like a general on inspection. Except now. The war was long over, and these soldiers had laid down arms forever. He stopped at section 60. There, nestled between two oaks, was the grave of Captain Terrence T.J. Banks, one of the first soldiers to die under Harold's command in Iraq. A photo clipped to the headstone showed a young black man with a crooked smile and eyes full of life. Harold knelt, his knees groaning in protest. "Morning, son," he whispered. "You'd have laughed your tail off watching me scold that judge." Powell walked in like thunder, made the whole room shake. He chuckled, then his face softened. "I got your mom full benefits now. Your daughter. She's going to college on a military survivor scholarship. She wants to be a lawyer. Can you believe that?" A breeze passed through the trees. "Funny how I went to court for a procurement deal and ended up unburying ghosts," he muttered. "But maybe that's what we needed." As he stood, a small voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir," said a boy, maybe 10 years old, holding his father's hand. "Are you the statue man?" Harold blinked. "I suppose I am." The boy stepped closer. "My grandpa said you're a hero. He said you told the truth when no one else would." Harold smiled. "I had just reminded people what was already true, that your grandpa and men like him matter." The boy pulled something from his pocket, a crumpled drawing of Harold's statue. It was a child's sketch, uneven lines, big boots, medals drawn as stars. "Can you sign it?" the boy asked. Harold took the paper with both hands like it was a sacred relic. "What's your name, son?" "Jacob." He signed. "To Jacob, never forget them. And never forget your voice matters too, Harold Jefferson." As the boy walked off, Harold felt the sun warming his shoulders. Not oppressive, gentle, like someone was watching. Meanwhile, in classrooms across the country, students were studying a new addition to their American history curriculum, a module titled Modern Voices of Valor. And among the first pages was a black and white photo of Harold Jefferson standing in court, flanked by Colin Powell. Beneath the headline, "The Day Justice Stood Attention." Veterans hospitals began naming rooms after him. Schools invited him to speak. A streaming documentary titled The Forgotten Soldier climbed the charts, narrated by none other than Denzel Washington. At every turn, Harold stayed humble, even when the world called him an icon. But fame didn't distract him. His mission was unfinished. At the age of 74, Harold founded the Echo Fund, an organization dedicated to investigating cases where veterans were wrongfully denied benefits, pensions, or care. His first act was to hire a team of lawyers, including Maria, who now had a law degree and fierce determination to carry his cause forward. The second act was to personally visit VA hospitals across the country. Not for speeches, but for listening. In one hospital in Atlanta, he sat beside a double amputee soldier named Marcus who had given up hope. "You're Harold Jefferson," Marcus whispered. I'm just a soldier like you." "No, sir," Marcus said, tears falling. "You reminded them we're not invisible." Harold gripped his shoulder. "Then don't you dare disappear, son. Not on my watch." Years passed, and as the world changed, Harold grew slower, his steps more deliberate, but his fire never faded. One quiet evening, he sat in his apartment, flipping through a photo album. There was his unit, young, wild, unbreakable. There was Powell. There was Maria, her graduation day, a photo of the statue, lit by moonlight. Then a knock. He opened the door to find a man in a crisp postal uniform. "Young, nervous, Mr. Jefferson. This just came. Overnight. From Fort Bragg." Inside the envelope was a sealed letter. "To the warrior who gave us back our voices, your legacy has transformed how we treat our veterans. We are proud to inform you that the United States Army has named a new training academy in your honor. It will be called the Harold Jefferson Institute for Integrity and Service. Future leaders will walk through those halls, and they will remember you with eternal gratitude." Department of the Army. Harold sat in silence, not crying, just still. A slow exhale escaped his lungs, and for the first time in years, he said aloud to no one in particular, "It was worth it." That night, as he lay in bed, The moonlight cast shadows across his walls, the medals, the certificates, the letter from the president, and the drawing from little Jacob. Then his eyes fluttered shut. When Harold Jefferson passed in his sleep at age 81, the world mourned a warrior, a reformer, a voice of the forgotten. Flags flew at half-staff. Colin Powell, now retired, stood at the podium during the funeral, voice cracking as he said, "He didn't fight for medals, he fought for memory." Maria read a letter she found in his desk, one Harold had written long ago but never sent. "To whoever finds this, I was just one man. But sometimes, one man is all it takes to make someone listen. If you feel invisible, stand anyway. If they mock you, speak anyway. I wasn't loud, I was just true. And sometimes that's enough." And with that, the world closed the final chapter on Harold Jefferson's story. But his echo, it never stopped ringing.